Warm welcome to you for the third episode in our webinar series, Future Focus, in partnership with Equinix. So in this series, we take 4 industries experiencing deep level disruption and structural change and explore how companies can respond effectively to these changes and deliver the services and products that customers want now, but also in the future. So today, we're going to talk about the future of commerce and explore how retail and its supply chain are experiencing almost a perfect storm of disruption and change. And to do that, I'm delighted to welcome Scott Robertson. Scott's the lead architect at Co-op. Hi, Scott. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone.
And along with Scott, Matt George, specialist subject matter expert in retail, e-commerce and digital transformation. Hi, Matt. Welcome to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you very much for joining us today. To those of you watching and listening, if you have a question at any time, if you add it to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen with your name, if you wish to be identified, I will put them to Scott and Matt just after we've had a discussion and gone through some of the key challenges and trends that are facing the retail and commerce sector at the moment. So do pop your questions in there. It's a good opportunity to ask any burning questions. So without further ado, we'll let's sort of have a think about some of the current trends and challenges facing retail. I mean, the sector's been changing substantially for some time. Scott and Matt, you both know that very well, and undergoing lengthy cycles, I think, of disruption and then reinvention. 2020, I think is fair to say, has been an unprecedented year of challenge. Scott, can you talk us through your view of what some of these challenges are in the context of your work at Co-op?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for those that don't know, Co-op is it's the largest convenience retailer in the UK. So we've got about 2,500 or so Co-op branded stores, and there's probably the same again of NISA, which we wholesale to. So we cover a broad range of that convenience market, and this year has seen all manner of chaos and carnage throughout everybody's lives, and it's completely changed the way that people have approached their kind of shopping. From us being suddenly thrust into sort of front and center of being able to provide a service to the public, coupled with Co-op's fairly strong sort of community ethos that we have. We've been right there on the coalface of kind of the COVID pandemic and other things that are kind of happening around just retail generally. But this year has seen people's shopping habits totally change. The frequency that people are going to stores has reduced. The amount of things that people are putting in their baskets has increased per visit. With travel restrictions, people not wanting to leave the house, people having to stay locally, the demands on us as a convenience retailer have just gone bananas, really. We've seen unprecedented levels of footfall through our stores at a time when we have to limit the amount of people that come through the stores, right? Because of the restrictions that we're having imposed upon us by the government. So there's two kind of competing things there. The Co-op is not just a convenience food retailer, though. We've got a couple of other arms that we are retailing in as well, which is so we are a healthcare provider in terms of what we do with prescriptions and sending them out to people, right? So again, people not being able to go and visit their doctors. We've seen, again, unprecedented demand on the prescription service that we've got, which again is putting demands on our supply chain. We've also got a funeral care business, and it's the UK's largest funeral care business, which unfortunately was really, really busy, towards 3 or 4 months ago. So we've had different competing things across different competing sectors, all sort of affecting us at the same time. And it's not as rosy as you might think in terms of, more footfall to stores means more profit. We've had to implement a whole bunch of changes in all the stores, which again, because we're a convenience retailer, is compounded by the fact that we've got 2,500 efforts to make each change. So if it's, you've got to put a screen up at every till. Well, we've got 5 or 6 tills in 2,500 stores. Right? It's a similar challenge to what the other supermarkets have got, but just on a slightly different scale. Tesco's might have 60 or 70 checkouts in some of their big stores, but they haven't, they'll have 150 to 200 stores across the UK of that sort of size. Whereas they're small, but there's many of them. And again, because of the nature of the Co-op stores, how they've organically grown over the years, they're in, every single footprint of our stores is pretty much unique. They're in office blocks and apartment blocks and old buildings in city centres and stuff. So actually being able to keep a large amount of stock in a stockroom for a very small unique store is a huge challenge for us. So some of the things that we're doing in the technology space is to try and slicken up the speed of and accuracy of the things that we deliver to the stores. So the stores aren't having to stockpile, 15 crates of toilet roll, which take up a huge amount of space for not very many products, which we've already seen at the start of the year, and fingers crossed we don't see again sort of happening in the next few weeks as people start to get a bit more sort of anxiety levels start to rise again. So from a technology perspective, we're constantly trying to optimize that supply chain, how we do what we do, when we do it, etc. Things like lowering waste is all part of that, being able to provide the right products at the right time to the stores. And there's a similar sort of thing happening in the healthcare business, and there's a similar sort of thing happening in the funeral care business as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I think also that's really brought to life what a unique business the Co-op is. Probably perhaps people haven't thought about it in that way before. I mean, Matt, so perhaps to echo that, I mean, looking across the retail and e-commerce sector, any additional thoughts on some of these key challenges from the last 6 months or so? And I know that it is a very long list this year.
So, well, picking up on some of the things Scott says, and also where I'd start is that let's talk, pre-pandemic, because what we were seeing in this sector was transformation and disruption anyway. So all of the businesses in the sector, whether it's physical or online, were going into an unprecedented level of disruption, change to their business, or how they were trying to shape that up for the future. And then, the pandemic struck, and it's fascinating hearing Scott's insights to it, because I think you take for granted the speed at which you have to adjust and the agility some of these, retail outlets have had to face. So I think let's park that, because I think there's some learnings that come from that, and we can talk about that a little bit in the future. But the other thing I'd like to say, if we look at commerce in general, the 3 or 4 things that these businesses have to plan for anyway. You sort of have to look at changing consumer habits. You have to look at, a changing demographic profile coming into the shop and how they want to shop, adapting new technologies into the supply chain and how you integrate those. And, this ever increasing demand for what retailers look for in sort of omni-channel, the ability to be able to serve the right products to the right person, et cetera, et cetera. So that was there even before we got into the pandemic. And then we hear the challenges of, the retailers have just to effectively keep those wheels turning. And not only that, I think as they keep those wheels turning, and I think we're going to come on to it, it's about you have a sudden curveball that says, right, you need all of your employees out of your call centers and they've got to work from home. So you've got this, as you said at the beginning, this perfect storm. But I really want to emphasize that you can, how business has adapted to this. We want to take out some real learnings of that, whether that's agility, whether that's difference in terms of sort of IT processes. So, huge learning curve, huge challenges. And I think we're going to see, as we go into not, I hope, full lockdown, but, Scott knows because they have shops in different locations around the country, it's adapting to some of those different measures now that we've all got to work with.
Absolutely, and that leads us on, I think, to talk about some of the delivery challenges, as you intimated in the beginning, Scott, and specifically the scale of Co-op and other retailers. I know that Co-op's got a particular profile, but looking and digging into some of these things, you know, the patterns of behavior have shifted incredibly quickly for customers and employees. I mean, it's interesting to think about how the IT backbone really needs to support the changes around social distancing, whether that's more automation, and then also remote working, which again is something that of course affects core staff. I mean, thinking about some of the infrastructure and some of the architectural principles then, Scott, I mean, how does the technology architecture at Co-op underpin that? Are you moving towards being a cloud first organization? Were you doing that anyway before some of these challenges hit?
Yeah, we were. So I had the enviable task of coming up with our cloud strategy, which was written and sort of agreed probably about 18 months ago now. So we've got some, I mean, as Matt was sort of saying, we've got some technology shifts that we were doing to react to how the market was just performing anyway. So greater agility, speed of change, speed to market, all those, you know, the usual sorts of drivers for the CFO. So we'd already embarked on a bit of a cloud first strategy anyway, which was, and it was kind of based on what Matt was suggesting there about that omni-channel experience, you know. It's so Co-op doesn't particularly have a online presence, but it's something that has been accelerated through again, the pandemic has just brought that front and center. People not wanting to leave their house. How do we do deliveries? Those sorts of things. And we actually have quite a interesting dynamic that we own a lot of stores. So they are out there in the communities. So things like an Amazon delivery can now be sent to Co-op stores. Things like a John Lewis delivery can now be sent to a Co-op store. So if you've got to go out to get your food, you can now get your deliveries and stuff in the same sort of place. So we're trying to, how do we partner with those sorts of organizations as well to make the most of the footprint that we've got? So that's something, because that's a unique thing that the Co-op has. But from an IT perspective, yeah, we've been on that cloud journey for probably 12 to 18 months anyway, starting to look at cloud native applications. So not just moving what we've currently got and how it's currently architected into the cloud, but because that just gives you cost and complexity in a different hosting location. It doesn't fix any of your problems, right? The story that I tried to sell as part of that strategy was that the cloud isn't a place to host IT equipment, right? It is a way of delivering IT and technology services to your business, right? Whether that's in your own data centers, whether it's in a hyperscaler like Google or Microsoft or whatever, or whether it's in a co-location like a Equinix facility, for example. You can still deliver that speed of change, that software-defined everything. You can still do all of that, right? You can deliver services in a cloud-like modular way, regardless of where the actual sort of physical tin and wires are hosted. And I think that's quite an important distinction to make. You know, it's not just about chucking it into a public cloud and what have you. You can still gain those benefits with the different levels of risk and control that each of the businesses might have in those areas. You know. So that was something that we were doing anyway. COVID has accelerated that horribly. It's put huge demand and huge pressures on all of us as a workforce, and some of that's come from, we can't go into the office. You know, our support centre in Manchester, which is kind of where the Co-op is sort of based, typically has about 3,500 people in the building on a normal day to day. The building's designed around 80% occupancy anyway, and all of a sudden, you know, middle of March, bang, we're all sent home. Well, what do you do with 3,500 people? Our entire IT for the building is pretty much based around a virtual desktop delivered to thin clients for people sat to consume in the building. The call centers are in the building. There's people with headsets and you know, telecom devices that are part of the building fabric. You know, they're wired in. That we can't go to work. You can't go into the office anymore. How do we do that? So the delivery of laptops to people to enable them to work from home, right? It's suddenly a massive thing. You know, the increase is, you know, was huge. So our colleague services department was swamped for a while. That led to different challenges that we didn't even begin to think about, like how do you suddenly patch 2,500 laptops that aren't on the network because you're all working from home using Teams and Zoom and you know, collaboration tools? You don't need to be connected to your corporate network. All of the patching and antivirus and software delivery are all geared up to be delivered to your corporate network. They're not geared up to be delivered over the internet, for example, or your security scanning and all that kind of stuff. Your internet proxies and your perimeter that we normally love and sits around all of your well, that's now all your staff are now suddenly outside of that. The call center staff that are using, you know, bespoke telephony and you know, hard coded turrets and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we ended up building a kind of a call center in the cloud in about 2.5 to 3 weeks. We got it up and running. The downside of that is now the C-level executives are going, oh, brilliant. Well, why can't you make a normal change in 3 weeks, right? So there's been a bit of a sort of double-edged kind of good and bad to all of this. I think what it's done is it's highlighted and it's sort of changed the priority of some of the things that they were already on our roadmap. So all of this sort of stuff and the technology changes we're making, they were kind of already on our 3 to 5 year horizon anyway. What we've had to do is shuffle some of those things around. You know, the demands of the pandemic and remote working. I don't think remote working is going anywhere, regardless of what happens, you know, out in the wider social world. There's certainly benefits to be had from doing that, but it's also provoked, you know, social challenges of how you deal with a remote workforce. That again, there are technology answers out there to it, but it's something that we'd never looked at before. So I think it's fair to say it's probably not changed what we were thinking about. It's certainly changed the priority in the order that they will get delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to bring Matt in because I could see when you were talking about C-level expectations and the board's expectations, Matt, I think you're having a good chuckle there. And any thoughts on that? I mean, is it for you this reordering of priorities, or are you sort of seeing fundamental technology principles changing? I mean, you know, like network principles, for example, and things like that.
Well, I think it's opened up the fact that things, you know, people were forced to do things quicker. And that doesn't mean they suddenly opened up a whole sort of opportunity for risk. It just meant that things had to be done. You had to solve a problem. You have to keep your business up and running. And I think, you know, we've talked before about, you saw that very early phase of, right, what can we do? You know, what's the immediate thing? What's the minimal viable product that we can give our team so that they can carry on working? The thing coming out of that is, what are the elements that will be BAU? And that's not just technology, that's a mindset. And I think Scott touched on that. You know, we're talking here about, you know, maybe an inertia that may have been lifted, maybe the fact that when you look at building out your IT footprint, it's a combination of physical and virtual. It's certainly, you know, we see at Equinix, we see this fact that the future of infrastructure is effectively, it can be anywhere. It's not location dependent, it's location independent as such. So we've got companies that are using, you know, physical points of presence in our data centers. They can complement that in some regions with actually spinning up virtual network POPs if there are demand challenges, you know, in terms of not only from the end users, but also from their workforce. So I think some of the learnings that we've gained from this are a positive. The technology roadmap, as I said, is already happening. So companies were on this cloud journey, but they're now looking at, you know, they're certainly in a hybrid cloud, in a multi-cloud environment. It's interesting in the retail sector. I think there's sometimes a tendency maybe not to use AWS because they have their own e-commerce business. But at the same time, it was fascinating to hear Scott's comment about how, you know, retailers are working with companies like Amazon Delivery to provide the best service for the end user. So I think you've got this element of co-opetition, I think I've heard is the expression before, where you've got companies that may work in your sort of, I suppose, market segment, but at the same time, by joining together, you can provide a complementary service to the actual end user. So, but going back to this mindset thing, I think that was always there, you know, in the way IT departments are sort of set up traditionally. You know, you may have someone who's in charge of network, someone who's in charge of cloud, someone who's looking at, you know, data centers. Well, the conversations we want to have is with all of those people. So maybe those functions need to join together. They can't necessarily have separate cost lines because, you know, we don't consider ourselves a data center provider. We're a digital infrastructure company. You know, we're involved in interconnection. We don't just sell space. So if that mindset changes, then I think it will help us in what we're trying to convey, but also I think it will help the business reach the right solution.
Thank you. And Scott, to come back to you, I mean, you've outlined, I think, some of the clear advantages of cloud and cloud native applications and architecting in this way. But there are challenges inevitably. To Matt's point about IT teams and the shape and structure changing, is that something that you're in the midst of, or how is that playing out?
Yeah, completely, totally right in the middle of at the moment. So we're going through, and it's a mindset change, right? It's a cultural change. I mean, all of the technology things that you want to use are out there today, right? How you make best use of them. So moving from a traditional data center hosted environment, you've got a storage team, a network team, you know, a compute team, you know, a team that looks after backups. You know, you might have a team for Linux or Windows operating systems, and they're all sort of dotted around in their own sort of center of excellences, not really talking to each other. You move to what I mentioned before. Cloud is a way of doing technology. It's not a hosting location. Well, that way of doing technology changes from the number of, you know, if you imagine like a T-shaped individual of a broad set of skills in an individual sort of tower of excellence, to more of a cube-shaped individual, where actually they know more about a broad set of things, because the actual nuts and bolts and the specialist niche stuff is being handled by your infrastructure provider. Now that might be a hyperscaler, it might be that you partner with somebody like an Equinix to do that for you, or it might be that you still retain those skills in-house and you do it yourself. But the number of people to do that and to connect all of those things together to build that scalable platform is a lot more reduced over how it's managed and maintained today. That then leads on to where is the IP? What do I want to keep in the organization? Where is the thought leadership going to come from? And that's going to come from how you connect all of these different components together, how you best make use of integration and the software defined everything that we've got. How do you automate this and deliver it in a predictable and manageable way, so every time you do it, it's the same? How do you make consumable sort of internal catalog delivery items that your engineers can take and put together to make, you know, put all these building blocks together to build a dynamic solution that is then customer facing? You know, that's where we want to get to. And the skill sets of your individuals, how they think, who they talk to, how they all collaborate together, all of that suddenly changes. It gets turned upside down almost, from having specialist silos that are so, you know, deep ingrained into the technological aspects of the bits that they're looking at, to they've now got to communicate with everybody. And some of the best techies that I've ever worked with, they quite like to sit in the dark corner of a room and never talk to anybody, right? And that's really good because you're playing to their strengths. And now all of a sudden they're being thrust into the limelight of having to talk to different people to make sure that all the handoffs, with a decoupled architecture, there's more handoffs, there's more communication, there's more touch points with all of these things. You can't do that if you're working in silos. So I think that the cultural aspects and cultural change that needs to be affected across the organization is probably a greater challenge than any of the technology things that we've had to come up against probably in the past 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Matt, I could see you empathizing there. Do you think that this, I suppose this old world approach, despite wanting to implement new technology, is what has led to, I guess, cloud migrations maybe not living up to expectations in some instances in the past?
Yes, and I think there's this balance here, because technology advances so quickly, and sometimes we struggle to keep up with it. So in our own business, we've changed, dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years, as I've said, from, when we probably had 100 plus locations spread across the world, but they weren't physically interconnected. Now they are all physically interconnected. The platform has doubled in size, but we're moving very quickly to, offering this, what I would call a suite of edge services. So the product set has to develop. But as Scott says, the skill sets and the talents have to sort of align along with that. But the other thing that I always think is interesting, and going back, the topic of this is the future of commerce. Going back to a point that actually we're driven by the market, our the sort of demographic profile now of shoppers, all of the groups that are moving into the 18 plus are all what we would call digital natives. So the demands that they expect in terms of what I would say will be technology driven, but in terms of buying products, receiving it online, having it delivered within hours now, are not going to stop. So it fascinates me when I look at a business like the Co-op, which has come from, really traditional sort of retailing routes, how they've expanded, they have other sectors, how they've gone through the pandemic with these demands. But also I noticed that they're also in the midst of rolling out new stores and new delivery services. So you're coping with moving from legacy to new, but at the same time, the demand on you from your customer base is incredible. So we're almost being like, I do think that the mindset has to change because you won't keep up. But it's a real challenge, and I think it's a good point that technology will just continually be developed because it's sort of on a roadmap as such. But the humans need to sort of keep up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we've had a couple of questions through, and it'd be good to address them now because they lead us on to thinking about the future. I know we're thinking the near-term future, and then there's a bit longer than that. But to go back to some of the online issues and the demographics. So I had a good question here from Adam Court, which is, so for Scott, with the Co-op's usage of machine learning and data analytics for sales patterns, have they been able to adapt fast enough to the COVID landscape, or have you had to massively change data modeling patterns, which is something that we've seen in other sectors? I mean, I think air transport, a collapse in demand has led to models just simply not working. Have you experienced something similar?
So yes, no, I guess. So we're in the process of kind of revamping all of our data science team anyway. And a lot of that was kind of, as Matt said before, there is just this constant evolution of the way that commerce is working. And again, because if you imagine those 2,500 stores and where they're located, right, you might have a store in an apartment block. Well, you're more likely to get a younger demographic of shopper in that apartment block in a city centre than you would, say, a out of town store up in the northeast versus somewhere down in London. So the political views, the age, the demographic, there's a whole bunch of modelling that kind of goes on about who people are, where they live, how much disposable income they've got, what sort of, even down to the weather. That all of those sorts of things will impact on the supply chain into what sort of products we stock in the store. For example, I'm fairly sure that avocados will sell out quicker in Altrincham than they will up in Sunderland, for example, right? Having those sorts of insights is massively key to making sure that supply chain is slick. And that's obviously important for us as a company because we sell the right products. We sell more of the right products to more of the right people, which obviously is great for the bottom line. With the way that we've been carved up in the past, you get silos of decision making based on silos of data. So as we've just sort of discussed with those support teams of infrastructure, you get people making decisions on a very blinkered subset of data. So data science and data mining is quite a big thing for us now. So what we're trying to do, and again, we're using the public cloud for this, we're using the likes of the hyperscalers to host single view of all of the data. Because if you ask a data scientist what piece of data they want, they just come back with all of it. That's the answer. Just give me all the data and I will tell you what I'm going to do with it. Right. So they've turned the requirements gathering on the head. So normally when you deliver an IT project, you say, well, what would you like? What are your requirements? We'll work away how we deliver it. And all of a sudden they go, you give me everything and I'm going to decide what I'm going to do with it, because they don't know what they might find. Right. So if you go in with an already closed data set, you've already shut off some doors that you might never even have seen to open, right? So this is the kind of the challenges that the data scientists guys have got. So the likes of analytics, deep learning and machine assistance, if you like, because I think it's just machine learning, but, you know, using the technology that's out there to help build those models and trawl through that data for pattern matching, etc. Is something that we're looking to move towards. You know, it's consolidating all the data marts into a single place, right? That's the first thing to kind of do. So it's totally something we're looking at. Again, it's something that we're in the middle of kind of doing. The majority of our data actually, you know, it's kind of due to start to go live in the next couple of months to start to get some of these insights. So we're kind of at that tipping point of gathering all this data together to allow, you know, the data boffins to start to you know, poke and prod and number crunch.
And Matt, just on that point, any sort of follow-ups there? Because I guess there's a big impact on infrastructure, you know, in terms of the way that data is changing, you know, patterns of usage, you know, volumes. With the big shift to online retail that we're seeing, I mean, I guess what are some of the challenges around that?
Well, data is an interesting area because, you know, the demand for localized data collection will increase because there's so much data out there. So a lot of these, you know, what I would call data specialists, you know, some of the network providers are, you know, building these big IoT services, and they're using, you know, as I said, our job at Equinix is to sort of provide that environment where these things can be enabled. So these companies are building out core and edge nodes on our platform that can then be used across global markets. So, for example, in the UK, you know, to support mobile IoT and global connectivity, global cloud connectivity at scale. So this means that, you know, if you need data at a local point, you can call it in you know, the lowest latency possible. It enables you to deliver real-time analytics. It enables you to manage your supply chain, your stock, which at the moment is obviously, you know, under severe sort of fluctuation. And if you connect that up with your transport warehouse and you know, all of your sort of production facilities, it's going to enable you to run more efficiently. So data, but localized data, and the ability to capture it and use it in real time is incredibly important.
And actually that brings us on to another question that I had, and about the digital edge. I mean, you've mentioned that before, and also to Scott. I mean, what opportunities are there for, I guess, for capitalizing on edge technologies? Because physical stores are changing very rapidly. I mean, you've had to implement a substantial amount of change just to manage distancing. Is that an opportunity? I mean, do you think in the future that stores will continue to become more digitized and kind of more sensitive to customers? And is that an opportunity for, you know, for edge technologies to help with that?
Yes, I think so. I think it needs to be, again, this needs to be balanced with the demographic of the people that are coming through the stores, right? You know, you start to put digital signage in stores, and that may end up turning off half of you know, the people that they don't want to see that. They don't want to be bombarded with personal advertising. You know, we've already been through the, you know, opt out of cookies and stuff that's kind of kicked off over the past 2 years. Do you really want to bring that to, as I walk around the store with a mobile phone that the store knows is me? It knows that my membership number. It also knows what I bought last time I was in the store. You know, do we really want targeted advertising following me around the store to say you buy more pizza, buy more beer? You know, that sort of stuff. Insight into my own shopping habits there. But with the pandemic, we might have to do some things that are kind of out there in terms of the technology, right? We might have to have digital heat monitors. We might have to be scanning everybody that comes in through the door for either their temperature or something else. You know, something else may come along in the future. You know, things like gate analysis of people walking around stores is already being trialed by supermarkets, right? The likes of the Amazon kind of staffless store that they were trialing with cameras and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's a lot of, you know, the digital shelf edge itself. You know, being able to you imagine a shelf that's, you know, 15, 20 feet wide with a whole range of products on it. There's a price for each of those products. Wouldn't it be great if actually the shelf knew what product it was and it automatically linked back to the, you know, and that then links into your stock control and it links into your supply chains. You've got real-time analytics of what everything's doing where in every single store you've got, right? Some of those things you can backhaul back to your center. Some of those things you don't want to do. You know, if you might want to aggregate data. If you're looking at footfall and how people are moving around the store, you don't necessarily want to send all that back in its raw format. You might want to you know consolidate that and bring that up to a sort of chapter heading level, and then send the results back to your data analysts. So I think there will be some need for some edge. What that happens to be, I'm not entirely sure. You know, some of the intelligent cameras and things that are on the market now are you know, they're remarkably clever, and you know, we're starting to move to you know, even higher definitions of recordings of stuff, and you just can't send 4K traffic from 2,500 stores all the way back to over. You know, imagine some of our stores that are on a wild Scottish island in the Outer Hebrides somewhere. You know, they haven't got the bandwidth. You know, or they're in a small village where someone's old school telly is suddenly breaking all the broadband, as we saw on the news yesterday. You know, so all of this, the national infrastructure out there isn't good enough to backhaul all of this stuff. So I'm pretty certain there'll be some edge technology out there that we're going to have to implement at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move to another question that's come in, please do, anybody who is listening and has a question, pop it into the Q&A box, because we've now got some time to ask any questions of Scott and Matt. Just to come to another question, and this again goes back to something that Matt talked about, which is risk, and from Adam, with the new speed of delivery, how are you managing risk around architecture and design and delivering building blocks and the things that work and that are sustainable? This sounds like a very good question.
It is a very good question. I don't know if I've got a really good answer either. So one of the problems that we've seen with kind of digital delivery, I guess, and cloud native stuff is you can deliver more stuff quickly, but there's no guarantee of the quality of the stuff you're delivering, right? The pressures of the pandemic have seen us move to a is it good enough model, right? Matt mentioned that, you know, kind of that minimum viable product. The whole ethos of you know, the digital delivery to certainly the you know, the teenagers of today that haven't known anything else, right? They're quite happy to have an application on their mobile phone update every 2 or 3 days as and when bug things get fixed. You know, my parents' generation don't want to see that. They want to see a product that is nailed on and it just works. Thanks very much. They're not interested in testing something for you know, for a coder out there. Where, you know, the younger members of our society, they've been brought up with nothing else. They don't know any different. So how do we govern something that is good enough? It's a huge challenge. You know, to a certain extent, all cloud has enabled us to do is create a bigger mess quickly. Right. So the strength of architectural governance on what we deliver and how we deliver it has to be it's got to be a bit more democratized, right? And part of that cultural change that I spoke about before is making people really accountable for what they are delivering now, right? If you are the product owner, then it falls to you. You can't rely on the IT departments making it super robust anymore, because those silos have gone. You know, those touch points and those integration points that I spoke of, they're now all your responsibility as a product owner, right? You are the person that sits above all of that has to make sure all of these things fit together and work properly. So governance models are now, they have to change. You know, risk acceptance has to change. Certain applications and products might want to move really quickly because they are targeted at an audience that can handle that sort of pace of change in the way that they consume it. Other products might not. They might have a different risk profile entirely. So being able to move different products at different places with different risk appetites is a challenge that I think every single organization, not just in retailing, is going to have to cope with. But I think that the answer that I will give is it's making the right people accountable for the right things, and it's democratizing that, empowering the right people in the right way. It's not easy. I'm not entirely sure how we're gonna face off to all of those challenges, but that's a leadership and a cultural thing that I think everyone's going to have to adapt to.
Absolutely, thank you. And Matt, over to you. And these are some really interesting and I think key issues that there aren't obvious solutions to. Any final thoughts from you before we come to a close?
No, there aren't exact answers for these things we're talking about, because that is this part of the thing we have to solve. We're in this period of rapid change and rapid development. I think to Scott's point, I look at how we develop our product sets now. We're a global business. But the key thing that we have across our business is that we can get significant learnings from our other markets. We can get significant learnings across industries, because we don't just work with retailers and e-commerce. We can look at the financial services market. We can look at the media broadcast market. But this bit about is an interesting sort of, I suppose, juxtaposition, that bit about working in silos. Yes, in some ways, people can build the greatest things in isolation, like gaming developers and markets like that. But you have to collaborate, because what we've also seen in the past 6 months is industries, manufacturing sectors move into healthcare sectors, retailers move into transport and broadcast. So it's an exciting time, but it's also a challenging time as well, in terms of how we can, I suppose, get the rigor that sometimes we've been used to, but at the same time not put so much rigor in that we don't lose that innovation and that speed to market that I think maybe some of this disruption has given us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, one final thing from you. I mean, what is a critical priority for you in the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 months?
Oh wow, blimey. I think it's consolidating what we've already done, and it's not panicking. I think the things we are doing are probably the right things. I think the answer is probably not a technology thing. It's just having the resilience to constantly adapt to change, right? The position we're all in at the moment is that change is happening around us when we can't really, we're all sat at home, and we don't have those, the groups of people that we normally have interacting with Banter today. So I think that the biggest challenge that we're going to continue to have over the next 3 to 6 months is how we as human beings continue to cope with the change, right? Because fundamentally it's us that has to deliver the technological, root and branch changes to the organization to enable the organization to deliver. So, for me, looking after the staff and the well-being of those staff enables the technology change, which enables certainly for us as a co-op, it enables that impact to be seen into the communities, which is where we all want to be. So, it's about keeping us heads above the water, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We have run out of time. There's always plenty more that we could discuss, and I'd like to thank both of you for your time and commitment, and Scott, particularly because as you've outlined, this is, as we discussed, this is a very been a really challenging year, but for bringing to life some of the key challenges, and then also some of the delivery aspects. And thank you, Matt, for talking us through some of the technological impacts. But I think the lesson at the very end is that it isn't really just about the technology, that there's some really critical things about structural change and cultural change that you've really brought to life for all of us. So thank you very much.